Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is in Mount Isa in Queensland touring a zinc mine as part of his support for the regions. He held a Q&A a short time ago.
I have great faith and I'm incredibly optimistic about Australia's future. And one of the things we need to do, though, is to make sure that that growth occurs in the regions so that we take pressure off our capital cities. I've spoken with Bob today about Mount Isa and some of its needs and what it requires going forward. And I look forward to working with him as well as with the private sector. The Mayor we were with last night, as well as the Premier of Queensland, Anastasia Palaszczuk, and it's been fantastic that I've been joined during these 2 days by Senator Anthony Chisholm, who does such a fantastic job representing Queensland, particularly in Queensland's regions. And I want to thank Anthony, who's responsible, particularly in Queensland, for looking at social infrastructure and education, but also regional development here in Queensland and working as part of my government to make a difference. Happy to take questions.
Prime Minister, how do you ensure the future of a town like Mount Isa when the cost of living is so high out here?
Yeah. What we need to do is to look at ways in which we reduce cost of living, and we're certainly doing that. Last night at the rodeo, I had 2 people come up to me and say, "Thank you for pursuing cheaper medicines. That will make a difference to me and my family." And the fact that the Coalition and One Nation's attempt to stymie cheaper medicines failed in the Senate on Thursday is good news, halving the costs of medicines on top of the reduction in costs for medicine that we introduced on January 1. Here for the workforce, cheaper childcare, 1.2 million families, including ones in this region, will make a difference. We've worked with the Queensland Government to deal with the energy price spike that occurred as a result of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And that's making an enormous difference, particularly for low-income earners and people who are Social Security recipients. Our energy price relief plan, $3 billion to make a difference. Fee-free TAFE here is making an enormous difference. At a facility like this, what we need to do is to train our young Australians or retrain people, because of the changing nature of the workforce, into new jobs. Fee-free TAFE, 180,000 places this year, 300,000 beginning next year. All of these changes aimed at cost of living. Now, we need to also address issues such as housing. We have our Housing Australia Future Fund stuck in the Senate. We want to get that through. We want to produce more social and affordable housing here. But we also want more private sector investment in housing so that we reduce dependence upon the fly-in, fly-out workforce in towns and cities like this. The quality of life for families is much better if people live where they work. And we know that that's the case. And that's something that Bob Cato is really passionate about, and he's raised with me today. And we'll take back to our Housing Minister, Julie Collins, as well, as a direct result of this visit.
Prime Minister, the letter that Cheng Lei issued to the Australian people talked about how she hadn't seen a tree in 3 years, that her bedding is taken out once a year in the sun to air. Are you concerned for her welfare?
I certainly am, and Cheng Lei should be released. This is 3 years too long, and we have made those representations. We will continue to make those representations, as we do, constantly stand up for the rights of Australian citizens. And Cheng Lei is an Australian citizen. She's someone who does not deserve this treatment, and she's someone who should be released. We've made that point at the highest levels. We'll continue to make that point whenever Australia meets with China. And it is important that her human rights as an Australian citizen be respected.
How often do government officials have contact with her?
We have since we've come into office, there has been increased contact with Cheng Lei, hence the reason why you could read her letter to the Australian people. It is a very passionate plea to be reunited with her children and her family.
Can you confirm if your government will honour the $180 million in federal funding for the Cuandin irrigation scheme that the Morrison government promised?
Yeah, we have now received the business case, and that's being assessed by our Water Minister, Tanya Plibersek, and that's being assessed in a proper way. We always want to make sure that there's business cases for projects that require significant investment. I've visited Hughenden on a couple of occasions. I've been there to see the Kidston project that is progressing. I've been to see Big Kennedy and Little Kennedy. I've spoken with the Mayor there on a number of occasions, most recently at the Australian Council of Local Government meeting that we reconstituted, and we'll continue to work through that issue with the proponents.
You've talked about your desire to have a public holiday if the Matildas win, but small business says it's a bad idea and it'll cost them. Do you agree with their concerns?
Well, I do note that there were concerns expressed when we had the public holiday for the sad death of Queen Elizabeth II. And some said that that was something that would cause economic disruption. What that did, of course, was lead to increased economic activity in a whole lot of businesses, particularly small businesses. And it actually benefited a whole range of those businesses. Look, these are decisions that are for state and territory governments, but the Matildas are inspiring an entire nation, is what is happening. And I certainly wish the Matildas all the best this afternoon at 5 o'clock at Suncorp. The whole of Australia will be watching the Matildas and cheering them on. And what we're seeing here is something that isn't just good for the health of young Australians, to encourage them to play in a physical sense, which of course it is. The inspiration that the Matildas are providing, particularly to young girls but also to young boys, will encourage them to play team sport. Team sport is good. You learn how to win, you learn how to lose, you learn how to cooperate with your teammates. You learn something else as well, that the team is more important than any individual. And I think we've seen that. I mean, Sam Kerr was our flag bearer at the coronation. She is a great Australian. And I certainly hope that she gets a whole lot of game time at 5 o'clock. But for people who said that the Matildas couldn't win without Sam Kerr, quite clearly that has not been the case. And the 2 goals that they scored in the round of 16 were just extraordinary. And if we see 2 goals like that at 5 o'clock, I'm sure we'll be talking about the Matildas playing in the semi-final. But I wish them well at 5 o'clock.
Peter Dutton says a coalition government would fight for constitutional recognition for Indigenous people. Does his position damage the prospects of the referendum this year?
Well, Peter Dutton was part of a government for 9 years. You've had, when it comes to the constitutional referendum that will take place in the last quarter of this year, this isn't something that's come in a vacuum. This is something that came after a long process of consultation, begun under John Howard, progressed under Julia Gillard. Then Tony Abbott established a referendum advisory group that he established when he became Prime Minister. It is the process that led to the Uluru Statement from the Heart, that one-page document agreed to in the First Nations Constitutional Convention held in 2017. You then had a report established after a parliamentary committee chaired by Julian Leeser and by Patrick Dodson, a committee established by the government under Tom Calma and Marcia Langton, which produced a report that went to the Morrison government not once but twice. The Scott Morrison, before the 2019 said that there would be advance. I was there at the Garma Festival in 2019 where Ken Wyatt spoke about a referendum taking place. Nothing happened. Nothing happened. The idea that Peter Dutton is going to advance this issue after he presided over a process in which he pretends that this has just arisen in recent times is, quite frankly, as disingenuous as some of the questions that have been asked in the Parliament over the last 2 weeks. I say this: there is an opportunity to get constitutional recognition for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people this year. And if not now, when? If not now, when? The idea that having done absolutely nothing to advance actually having a referendum, and then after indicating that they support constitutional recognition and they will legislate for the voice, they are then running a scare campaign about the voice. The contradictions are there for all to see. And I think it is really unfortunate because this is a lost opportunity. I support the gracious request of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to be recognised in the Constitution in the form in which they've asked. This is simply an advisory body that can do good and can do no harm. One that their power is the power of its ideas. This will give respect to Indigenous Australians. It will lift up all Australians, make us feel better about ourselves when you acknowledge the fullness and richness of your history. And it will also be recognised by the world. Will be watching what happens as well. It will be a sign that we're a confident, mature nation going forward. And I note as well, and I congratulate Mark Speakman, the leader of the coalition in New South Wales, the opposition leader, for his very clear statements that he will be voting yes and supporting yes in the referendum campaign, following on from Dominic Perrottet's support for a yes vote in this referendum campaign as well. There were people during the Republic referendum said, "Oh, I don't particularly like this model, I'll wait for the next vote." That was last century. It's 2 waiting and there's no vote on the horizon. I say to Australians, this is an opportunity. Don't miss it. There are people, including the Premier of Tasmania, Jeremy Rockliff, including now the opposition leader in New South Wales, Mark Speakman, including all of the Labor Party premiers and leaders throughout the nation, but importantly as well, business leaders, the Business Council of Australia, the union movement, sporting codes, including the Football Federation, the AFL, the National Rugby League. People like to name one great North Queenslander, the great Jonathan Thurston, is there in the Yes pamphlet, explaining why for him this is really important going forward. You have every single major faith group in this country calling for a yes vote, calling for reconciliation. It's not too late for Peter Dutton to say, I'm going to try and argue against the Prime Minister on health or education or some other issue. Don't use this issue to cause division. Don't use this issue. It's something that I pleaded with him on. I put the case very strongly, and I thought there was hope when he appointed Julian Leeser as the Shadow Minister for Indigenous Australians and the Shadow Attorney General, given Julian's position on the record of more than a decade. And yet that, of course, ended up with Julian Leeser going to the backbench in order to fulfil the principal position that he has. I say to Australians, have a look at what the vote is about. Have a look at what the vote is about. It's just about recognition and then listening to Indigenous Australians so that we get better results.